Money can buy luxury, but it cannot hide secrets forever. Richard Alastair was a man who had everything the world envied. At just 45, he was among the most powerful billionaires in the city. His empire stretched across industries: real estate, technology, oil, and finance. Every newspaper praised him as a genius. Every magazine photographed him as a perfect man. And every business channel called him the golden touch of fortune. People admired him. Some feared him, but all respected him. His mansion stood tall on a hilltop, overlooking the glittering skyline. Marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars, and walls decorated with priceless art pieces. Everything about Richard Holmes screamed wealth. Cars worth millions lined up in his garage, and his closet was filled with designer suits from the world's top fashion houses. To the outside world, Richard's life looked flawless. But behind the high walls of luxury, there was a man wrestling with emptiness. He had money, he had fame, but he had no real peace. His marriage had failed years ago. His wife had left, unable to endure his cold, distant heart. His friends were only business partners who toasted champagne with him at parties, but disappeared when silence fell. And his family? He had no one who truly cared about him beyond his wealth. Richard lived in a golden cage, admired yet alone. But there was one more thing, something darker that he kept buried deep inside. It was a secret that threatened to shatter the image he had built so carefully, a secret that could ruin his reputation if it ever came out. That secret lived under his very roof. Every morning, the mansion buzzed with the footsteps of maids, chefs, gardeners, and drivers. Among them was Amara, a young maid who had quietly worked in his home for over a year. She was different from the others, gentle, disciplined, and always respectful. She never asked unnecessary questions, never gossiped, never demanded attention. Amara had come from a small village, leaving behind hardship to earn money for her sick mother. She worked long hours without complaint, carrying the dignity of someone who knew pain but refused to let it break her spirit. Richard noticed her presence in subtle ways. The way she moved silently across the marble floors, her warm smile when she served him coffee, her soft humming while she dusted the grand library. For a man who lived in noise, business calls, media cameras, endless meetings, Amara's quietness was strangely comforting, but he never let it show. Billionaires were not supposed to notice maids, and he convinced himself that she was invisible. Yet she was not. One late evening, Richard walked into the kitchen unexpectedly. Most of the staff had gone home, but Amara was still there, carefully packing leftovers into containers. She looked up, startled, her big brown eyes meeting his sharp gaze. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them. He noticed the tiredness on her face, the faint sadness in her eyes. She looked vulnerable yet strong, fragile yet resilient. It unsettled him, though he quickly masked it with his usual coldness. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice deeper than usual. I was just finishing the kitchen, sir," she replied softly. Richard nodded and turned away. But as he walked back to the study, he couldn't shake the image of her eyes. They held something real, something he hadn't seen in years, not in his business partners, not in the women who threw themselves at him for his money, not in the glamorous crowd he mingled with. Amara's eyes carried truth, and that truth made him feel human. From that night, Richard found himself noticing her more often. When she watered the roses in the garden at dawn, when she carried trays to the dining hall, when she quietly wiped the dust off the grand piano. She moved like someone who belonged nowhere, yet everywhere. But Richard was a man used to power, and power often blurred boundaries. His heart, lonely and starved for real affection, betrayed his mind. The more he noticed Amara, the harder it became to ignore her presence. What started as silent glances grew into brief conversations. What started as formality turned into moments where their worlds touched, even if only for a second. It was dangerous, and Richard knew it. He carried a reputation that could not afford weakness. The world saw him as untouchable, flawless, in control. But inside the walls of his mansion, he was a man drawn to a woman he should never have looked at. And then it happened. One night, after a long day of endless meetings and public appearances, Richard came home exhausted. The mansion was quiet, shadows stretching across the hallways. He poured himself a drink, hoping to silence the emptiness gnawing at him. That's when he saw Amara cleaning the library shelves. She didn't notice him at first, and he watched her for a while. Her delicate hands moved gently over the books, her face calm under the golden glow of the chandelier. Something inside him broke. Maybe it was a loneliness. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was a silent desire he had buried for too long. He approached her, and when she turned startled, he saw the same eyes he had noticed months ago, eyes full of honesty, of fear, of unspoken emotions. That night, a line was crossed, a line neither of them could ever erase. For Richard, it was a moment of escape. For Amara, it was a storm of confusion, between duty and desire, between fear and hope. Neither of them spoke about it the next day, but both carried the weight of it in their hearts. Richard tried to push it aside. He drowned himself in work, in money, in the endless cycle of being the billionaire the world expected him to be. But secrets have a way of growing, and this one grew silently, hidden behind marble walls and golden chandeliers. He didn't know it yet, but the choice he made that night would change his life forever. For now, only he and Amara knew. The mansion carried on as usual, maids rushing, chefs cooking, drivers polishing cars. To the outside world, Richard was still the perfect billionaire. But deep inside, he knew he was living a lie that would soon demand a price. Because secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, have a way of coming to light. And Richard's secret was about to surface in a way he could never imagine. Amara had always known what hardship tasted like. Born in a small village far from the glass towers and neon lights of the city, her childhood was one of endless sacrifices. Her father passed away when she was barely 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Poverty was not just an obstacle in their lives. It was a constant shadow. Days often went by with nothing but boiled cassava or a bowl of thin porridge to fill their stomachs. Yet, even in struggle, Amara had carried dreams. She wanted to become a nurse, to wear the crisp white uniform and help heal people. She was bright, hardworking, and her teachers always praised her. But dreams are fragile when poverty sharpens its claws. Her mother fell ill, and the little money they had was swallowed by hospital bills. School fees became impossible, and Amara's dreams dissolved into reality. At just 16, she became the backbone of her family. By the time she turned 21, Amara made the hardest decision of her life. With her mother's health worsening and her younger siblings depending on her, she left the village for the city. She promised her mother she would send money home, no matter what it took. "I will take care of you," she whispered through tears as she boarded the bus that would carry her away from everything familiar. The city was overwhelming. Skyscrapers scraped the clouds, cars roared like restless beasts, and people rushed everywhere, chasing something invisible. For Amara, it was both terrifying and fascinating. She arrived with nothing but a small bag, a worn-out dress, and determination stronger than steel. After weeks of searching, she was hired as a maid in one of the richest households in the city, the mansion of Richard Alastair. To her, it felt like stepping into another world. The mansion's golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, and towering gates looked nothing like the dusty roads of her village. But she was not there to marvel. She was there to work. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after the stars had filled the sky. She scrubbed floors that shone like mirrors, polished tables worth more than her entire village, and washed linen softer than anything she had ever touched. The work was exhausting, but Amara never complained. Every paycheck meant food and medicine for her family back home. Every coin she saved brought her mother closer to healing. But inside the mansion's walls, she was invisible. The wealthy guests who visited never saw her. To them, she was just another shadow blending into background, another servant who bowed her head and disappeared. Sometimes she felt less like a human being and more like a machine, useful only when she worked, forgotten the moment she left the room. Yet she held on, because she had no choice. It was during those long, quiet months that her path and Richard's collided in ways neither expected. At first, she avoided his gaze, terrified of making a mistake that could cost her job. But slowly, she realized he noticed her more than the others. A nod here, a brief question there, small gestures, but enough to make her heart pound with both fear and something she couldn't name. Then came the night that changed everything. The night when the invisible Maid and the untouchable Billionaire crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Amara tried to forget it, to bury it as if it never happened. She told herself it was just a mistake, a moment that would fade into silence. She returned to her duties, polishing silver trays and scrubbing the marble staircase, pretending nothing had changed. But something had changed. Weeks later, she began to feel it, at first subtle, then undeniable. Morning nausea, strange cravings, dizziness that forced her to sit down in the middle of work. At first, she convinced herself it was exhaustion, but when her monthly cycle failed to come, her heart sank. She bought a test with the little money she had saved, hiding it in her small room. The results stared back at her, 2 bold lines that changed her world. She was pregnant. Her hands trembled as she clutched the test. Tears welled in her eyes, not of joy but of fear. How could this happen to her? She was a maid, barely surviving. How could she raise a child when she could hardly care for herself? And most of all, what about Richard? For days, she carried the secret like a heavy stone in her chest. She avoided Richard, avoided even looking in his direction. At night, she curled up in her small bed, her hands over her stomach, whispering to the tiny life growing inside her. "I don't know how, but I'll protect you," she promised through silent sobs. But promises were not enough to calm her fears. Should she tell him? The thought kept her awake for nights. On one hand, he had the right to know. On the other, she was terrified of what he might say or do. Would he fire her? Would he accuse her of lying? Would he throw her out of the mansion, leaving her homeless and penniless with a child to care for? The mansion, once a place of work, now felt like a prison of secrets. Every time she walked through the halls, she felt eyes watching her, though no one truly knew. Every time she cleaned Richard's study, she wondered if this was the moment she should speak. But the words froze in her throat. Her body changed with each passing week. Her dresses grew tighter, her steps heavier. She began waking up in the middle of the night with sharp pains, clutching her stomach in fear. And yet, no one around her knew. She carried the burden alone, hiding behind forced smiles and quiet endurance. But Amara was not just afraid for herself. She thought of her mother in the village, already sick and weak. She thought of her siblings, still needing her support. How could she explain this to them? Would they understand? Or would they see her as a disgrace? The weight of it all crushed her spirit. Sometimes she wished she could run away, escape the mansion, and disappear into the city. But where would she go? With no family nearby, no savings, and no friends, the city was a wilderness she could not survive in. And so she stayed. She worked, she endured, she prayed. Each night, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and asked herself the same question. Should I tell him? Finally, one evening, after weeks of battling her fear, she made a decision. Her heart pounded as she stood outside Richard's study door, clutching the fabric of her dress with trembling hands. She knew the risk, she knew the possible consequences, but she also knew she could not keep the secret forever. She knocked softly. "Come in." Richard's voice called from inside. Amara took a deep breath, stepped into the study, and closed the door behind her. Richard looked up from his desk, his sharp eyes locking onto her nervous figure. She opened her mouth to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I need to tell you something." Her world was about to change forever. Amara stood frozen in Richard's study, the walls around her towering like prison bars. The heavy scent of leather and expensive cigars filled the air. Behind his mahogany desk sat Richard, the billionaire every newspaper idolized, the man who had the world at his feet. Yet, to Amara, he was not a distant tycoon. He was a man who had once looked at her not as a maid, but as a woman. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the fabric of her dress. She could barely breathe. "Sir," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. I'm pregnant." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. The only sound was the ticking of the golden clock on the shelf. Richard stared at her, his sharp eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he pushed back his chair and stood. His face, once calm, turned cold as steel. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, dangerous. Amara swallowed hard. I'm carrying your child. His expression hardened instantly. The mask of the billionaire snapped back into place. His lips curled with disbelief, even anger. He let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Don't be ridiculous," he said flatly. "That's not possible." Her heart pounded in her chest. "It is true. I would never lie about something like this. You know what happened between us." Her words faltered, tears already filling her eyes. But Richard's gaze turned sharper, colder, as if each word she spoke was a personal insult. "No. What I know is that you're trying to trap me. Do you think I haven't seen this before? Women chasing after men like me, claiming they're pregnant, try and secure a lifetime of wealth? Do you really think I would fall for something so cheap?" Amara's knees nearly buckled. The cruelty in his words cut deeper than a knife. She shook her head desperately. "No, sir. Please, I swear on my life. I'm not after your money. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because this is your child, too." But Richard's voice thundered back, louder now, carrying the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Enough. I don't want to hear another word of this nonsense. Do your job, Amara, and keep your lies to yourself. If you dare spread this story outside these walls, I will make sure you regret it." His words struck her like a physical blow. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched her stomach protectively. He was not just denying the child. He was denying her. Denying everything that had happened. Everything she had believed meant something. For Amara, it was like the ground had been pulled out from under her feet. She had come into his study with trembling hope, believing perhaps he would at least listen, at least care. But what she received instead was rejection, so sharp it pierced her very soul. "Sir, please." Her voice broke into sobs. "I'm not lying. I have no reason to lie. I don't want your money. I don't want your power. I only want my child to know his father." "Enough." Richard's hand slammed against the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. His eyes burned with fury. "Do not test my patience. Amara, you will not ruin my name with your little tricks. If you value your job, if you value your safety, you will drop this nonsense immediately." The finality in his tone left no room for pleading. He had made his decision. Amara felt her heart shatter into pieces. She turned, her vision blurred by tears, and stumbled out of the study. The heavy door closed behind her with a sound that felt like the ending of everything she had ever hoped for. That night, Amara cried until her body shook. In the small, cramped servants' quarters, she sat curled up on her bed, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. She whispered to the life growing inside her, her tears soaking the pillow. "Your father doesn't want you," she choked out. "But I do. I will love you enough for both of us." She had thought telling him would bring relief, perhaps even acceptance. Instead, she had been humiliated, accused, and threatened. His denial was not just of the child, but of her worth, her dignity, her humanity. Meanwhile, Richard poured himself another glass of whiskey, his jaw tight, his mind racing. Alone in his vast study, he stared at the city skyline through the tall glass windows. The words Amara had spoken echoed in his head. No matter how hard he tried to silence them. "I'm pregnant. This is your child, too." But Richard was a man who lived by control. Control over his empire, his reputation, his image. A scandal like this could destroy him. He could see the headlines already. "Billionaire impregnates Maid." His rivals would pounce on it. His investors would question him. The world would laugh at him. "No," he muttered to himself, gripping the glass tightly. "She's lying. She has to be lying." And yet, deep down, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. A flicker he buried under pride and fear. Days passed, but the atmosphere in the mansion grew heavier. Amara avoided Richard at all costs, keeping her head bowed whenever he passed. Her once bright eyes now carried shadows of pain. The other staff noticed her silence, her tears when she thought no one was watching, but no one dared to ask. Inside her, life continued to grow. Each day, her body reminded her that the truth could not be denied, even if Richard refused to see it. She carried his blood, his child, and no amount of denial could change that. But what hurt most was not his threats, not his accusations. It was the fact that he had looked at her and seen nothing but a liar, a woman unworthy of his respect. She had given him her heart in silence, and in return, he had crushed it without mercy. Still, she refused to give up. She would carry the child, raise it with love, and protect it with every breath in her body, even if it meant walking this road alone. Richard, on the other hand, convinced himself he had done the right thing. He buried himself in business meetings and social events, smiling for cameras and shaking hands with politicians. To the world, he remained untouchable, flawless, the billionaire who could do no wrong. But in the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, he felt the weight of Amara's tearful eyes haunting him. Her trembling voice, her whispered plea, "This is your child, too," echoed his mind like a ghost he couldn't escape. Still, he pushed it away. Pride and fear ruled him. He told himself over and over, "She's lying. She's after my money. She's nothing but a maid." What he didn't know was that no amount of denial could erase the truth, a truth that would soon stare him in the face with eyes so familiar, so undeniable, that even the billionaire with the world at his feet would crumble. And so, Amara carried her burden in silence, heartbroken but determined. Richard carried his arrogance, blind to the storm that was about to hit his life. The bitter denial had been spoken, but the truth was only just beginning to reveal itself. Amara's world crumbled the night Richard denied her. The words he spoke, cold, sharp, dripping with disdain, echoed in her mind long after she left the study. "You will not ruin my name. Drop this nonsense immediately." Those words clung to her like chains, binding her heart with humiliation and despair. She retreated into the solitude of her tiny servant's quarters, curled up on the narrow bed that creaked beneath her weight. The walls seemed to close in on her as she wept silently into the pillow. Her sobs were muffled, not because she wanted to cry softly, but because she feared the other maids might hear. They already whispered about her enough. If they discovered her secret, the mansion would no longer feel like a workplace. It would become a prison of shame. Each tear carried a storm of emotions: betrayal, heartbreak, fear, and above all, loneliness. She had dared to hope, dared to believe Richard might accept the truth, might take responsibility for the life they had created. But instead, he had cut her down, branding her as a liar, accusing her of greed. He had stripped her of dignity with words more painful than any wound. And yet, inside her, life continued to grow. Each flutter, each ache, each small change in her body reminded her that the child was real, no matter what Richard said. She would place her trembling hand over her stomach and whisper through tears, "You are wanted. You are loved. Even if it's just me, I will never abandon you." But even promises could not ease the struggle of her days. Amara's work grew harder as the weeks passed. Her body ached. Exhaustion clung to her bones, and nausea made her tasks unbearable. Yet she pushed through. She polished the floors until her knees hurt, scrubbed the silverware until her fingers burned, and carried trays so heavy they nearly toppled from her hands. She dared not complain. Complaints could draw attention. Attention could lead to questions. And questions could unravel everything. At night, when the mansion fell silent, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to her heart pound in the silence. She felt trapped between two worlds: the world of the rich that dismissed her as nothing more than a maid, and the world of the poor she had left behind, where her family depended on her every paycheck. Where did she belong now, carrying a child that no one wanted to acknowledge? The staff began to notice the changes. At first, it was whispers. "She looks tired. She's gaining weight. Have you seen how pale she is?" Then came the side glances, the hushed conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. She could feel their eyes following her, judging her, speculating. One evening, as she folded linen in the laundry room, two maids passed by whispering. "Do you think it's true?" one asked. "It must be. Why else would she be hiding?" the other replied. Amara lowered her head, her eyes burning with shame. She wanted to shout that she was not a liar, that she was carrying more than gossip. She was carrying a life, but fear held her tongue. If she spoke, if the secret spread, she would lose everything: her job, her roof, her ability to send money home. The loneliness grew heavier with each passing day. Sometimes, when she was alone, Amara replayed that night in her mind, the night she and Richard crossed a line. She remembered his touch, his eyes saw for the first time, his silence that felt almost like vulnerability. In that moment, she had believed she saw the man behind the billionaire, a man who needed someone just as much as she did. But memory turned bitter with reality. That night had left her with a child, yes, but it had also left her with rejection so deep it bruised her soul. She wondered if he ever thought of her, or if she had been nothing more than a mistake he wanted to erase. "Was I foolish?" she whispered to herself one night, her tears staining the blanket. "Was it all just weakness for him? Did I ever mean anything?" But then, as if an answer, a small flutter stirred in her belly. Her child moved, reminding her that she was no longer alone. That small movement was her anchor, her reason to endure the storm. The further her pregnancy advanced, the greater her fear grew. What if she was discovered? What if Richard made good on his threats and threw her out? She had seen how merciless he could be in business. Would he show any mercy to her if she disobeyed his warning? She began saving every coin she could, hiding money in a small pouch under her mattress. She skipped meals, ate leftovers, and wore the same old dress just to send more money home and keep a little aside for herself. She imagined a day when she might need to leave with nothing but her child and her courage. At night, she prayed, "God, give me strength. Protect this child. If I must suffer, let it be me, but don't let this baby suffer." One afternoon, as she scrubbed the marble stairs, a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she collapsed against a railing. Her vision blurred, and the bucket of soapy water spilled across the floor. For a moment, she thought she might faint. A butler rushed forward. "Amara, are you all right?" She forced a smile, hiding the panic in her chest. "I'm fine, just tired." But she wasn't fine. Inside, fear clawed at her. Her body was giving in, her secret pressing harder against the walls she had built around it. How much longer could she endure before the truth came out? That night, she sat on her bed holding the tiny pouch of coins she had saved. Her tears had dried, replaced by determination. "If the world rejects us, so be it," she whispered to her unborn child. "I will not break. I will carry you, I will fight for you, and I will love you even if no one else does." Her words were heavy, but her voice was strong. Though Richard had denied her, though the world judged her, though her body ached with exhaustion, and her heart bled from rejection, she clung to hope. Hope that her child would be worth it all. Hope that someday, somehow, the truth would rise above the lies. And so Amara endured. Every day was a test of strength. Every night was a battle with her fears. She lived in silence, working through pain, carrying her secret like a shadow. But she was no longer just a maid. She was a mother now, and a mother's love could survive storms that would crush anyone else. What she didn't know was that her pain, her rejection, her silent suffering was only the beginning, because soon the day would come when her secret could no longer be hidden. The day her baby would arrive. The months dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Amara's body changed with every sunrise. Her belly rounded, her steps slowed, her breaths grew shorter. She tried to hide it under loose dresses, avoiding curious eyes, but no fabric could conceal the miracle she carried inside. Every flutter, every kick reminded her that she was not just surviving anymore, she was nurturing a life, and yet she carried it alone. Richard never spoke of her confession again. He moved through the mansion as though nothing had happened. If his eyes ever lingered on her, it was only for a second, quickly turning away as though to erase even the thought of her existence. To him, she was still just the maid. To her, he was both the father of her child and the man who had wounded her beyond repair. Amara's days blurred into exhaustion and pain. She scrubbed floors with trembling hands, carried trays while her back screamed in protest, and forced smiles when guests arrived. At night, she collapsed into her small bed, whispering prayers that her child would come safely into the world. But the night of her labor arrived sooner than she expected. It was just past midnight when the first wave of pain struck. Amara doubled over, clutching her stomach, her breath stolen by the sharp contraction. Sweat broke across her forehead as fear gripped her. She was alone in her small quarters, her cries muffled by the thick silence of the mansion. The pains grew sharper, closer, more relentless. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, afraid the others would hear. She had no family by her side, no husband holding her hand, no doctor rushing to help. It was just her and the child determined to enter the world. Hours passed in agony. Her sheets were damp with sweat. Her nails dug into the wooden frame of the bed. She prayed between sobs, "God, please don't let me die. Please keep my baby safe." Her vision blurred, but she pushed through the pain with strength she didn't know she had. And then, through the storm of tears and cries, she heard it, a small cry, weak at first, then stronger. Her child had arrived. Amara gathered the newborn against her chest, her trembling arms wrapping protectively around the tiny body. The baby's cry filled the room, a sound so fragile yet so powerful it silenced the storm within her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You're here! You're finally here!" She looked down at her child, and for the first time since Richard's denial, she smiled through her tears. The baby's skin was soft, his tiny fingers curling around her own. But it was when she saw his eyes that her breath caught in her throat. They were not hers. They were his. The baby's eyes, though newborn soft and blinking uncertainly, carried the unmistakable color and shape of Richard's. Bright, piercing, a mirror of the man who had denied him. Amara's heart broke all over again. She wanted to hate Richard, to erase him from her memory. But every time she looked into her child's eyes, she saw him. She saw proof that the billionaire's blood flowed in her baby's veins, proof that no denial could erase. She kissed her child's forehead, whispering, "You may not be wanted by him, but you will always be wanted by me." The days that followed were the hardest of Amara's life. She returned to her duties sooner than her body was ready, the baby wrapped in a small blanket by her bedside. Every morning, before beginning her chores, she would hold him close, inhaling his sweet scent, drawing strength from his innocence. But motherhood in silence was not easy. She had no one to guide her, no one to share the sleepless nights. She woke to his cries at odd hours, feeding him with trembling hands, singing softly so as not to wake the other staff. She named him Samuel, because, she whispered, "You are the answer to prayers I never thought would be heard." But Samuel's existence was not invisible for long. The staff soon discovered the truth. They saw Amara sneaking away to her quarters during breaks, heard the faint cries of an infant in the night. At first, it was murmurs. "She has a baby," they whispered. "Where did he come from?" Then the murmurs turned to speculation. "Have you seen the child's eyes? They don't look like hers." "They say the baby looks just like Mr. Alistair." The mansion buzzed with quiet gossip, but no one dared speak aloud in front of Richard. Still, Amara felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in their hushed tones. She kept her head low, protecting her son from the world's cruelty. At times, fear gripped her. What if Richard found out? What if he tried to take Samuel away, or worse, cast them both out? But when she looked at Samuel, sleeping peacefully in her arms, all fear faded. He was her strength, her reason to endure. Richard, for his part, remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. He was too consumed with his empire, his meetings, his social appearances. He heard faint rumors among the staff, but dismissed them as foolish chatter. Why should he care about the maid's personal life? Yet sometimes, when he passed by the garden, he caught a glimpse of Amara cradling the baby. The sight tugged at something deep within him, something he quickly buried under layers of pride. He told himself it wasn't his business, that it wasn't his child. But the unease lingered. Despite the whispers, despite the fear, Amara poured every ounce of love into Samuel. She sang him lullabies her mother had once sung to her. She told him stories of bravery, of hope, of survival. She whispered promises into his tiny ears. "You will never feel unwanted. You will grow up knowing you were loved from the very beginning." At night, when he opened his eyes, she sometimes felt a pang of despair. Those eyes, Richard's eyes, were both a curse and a blessing. A curse because they reminded her of the man who had denied him. A blessing because they proved Samuel's worth, his truth. Every time she held him, she felt the strength to keep going. No rejection, no judgment, no loneliness could break the bond between mother and child. But the mansion was not a place where secrets could stay hidden forever. With every passing day, the whispers grew louder. With every glance from the staff, Amara knew the truth was slipping out of her control. And though Richard tried to ignore it, fate was moving swiftly toward him. For soon, he would no longer be able to turn away. Soon, the eyes he had refused to acknowledge would stare directly into his soul.